In all of the hullabaloo regarding Splatoon Raiders, I actually didn't notice that we also got a Yoshi and the Mysterious Book trailer. I have not seen it yet. I've seen a couple of images online. I've seen like some GIFs and stuff like that. And it looks great. You know, I was really fired up with the game. Every time I see it, I get like more and more excited about it. It looks fantastic. We haven't gotten a Yoshi game since Crafted World in 2019, and in spite of all the spurging about that one and Woolly World, both were great. Okay, so I'm a big fan of these games. Very happy to see this come out. It seems to be a spiritual successor to Yoshi's Story, actually, which I think is kind of interesting because I think Woolly World and Crafted were more similar to Islands. So having something that's like more similar to Story and tone and style is actually kind of interesting. You know, Story is definitely something that plays a little bit differently than Island. So having something more like that is going to be very, very interesting. What I realized though, you know, looking at this, is just how many people were trying to downplay this. Like, I feel like I severely misjudged when I came out and like started talking about Splatoon Raiders, because I made a video about that immediately. You know, I kind of was preemptively talking about like, yeah, the community is going to try and downplay this, going to try and freak out about this, they're going to complain about the visuals, they're going to complain about the Switch 2 exclusivity, they're going to complain about Splatoon, they're going to complain about the single player, they're going to complain about the character design. You know, I came out and started talking about all this stuff that the community was going to try to do with Splatoon Raiders, but as a result of that, I completely neglected talking about Yoshi. And it seems like the community has settled on a narrative for this game. You know, they are doing the Mario movie approach, where they are trying to say that it is not a very good game because it is for kids. Okay, it is too easy. You can't die at it, and that means the game is bad. You know, it's the exact template we saw back when Kirby's Epic Yarn came out. You know, this was the talking point for a lot of game journals at the time. It was the reason I didn't pick up Epic Yarn when it came out. You know, it was like a big major thing. And of course, like, the game over time became very popular and beloved. But like, it seems like Mysterious Book is going through the same cope. You know, we're seeing the same song and dance again, where people are trying to say that there's no challenge to this game, that it's not going to be fun or well made, and that it's simply not worth their time because they only play real games like Dark Souls and Pragmata. You know, like, by the way, has anyone else noticed that like Yoshi's Island is the original dad simulator where you like escort a child? Like, you know, way better than Pragmata. But anyway, like, the community has been like trying very hard to like write off Mysterious Book, honestly, since it was first announced. And now that we're approaching release, it is coming out about a month from now, actually. Yeah, now that we're approaching release and that we've seen the trailer, like, you're seeing a lot of people try and say that this game looks very, very, very bad. You know, like, you have a lot of people coming out and just like endlessly coping and seething about these games, and I'm very curious if like it's gonna stick this time. Okay, because the last Yoshi game we got was Crafted World, right? And for some reason, that game got a reputation for being very, very bad. And I don't know. Like, for me personally, I do think it had kind of a weird development in which, like, the core gimmick of it, that, like, you were supposed to flip the maps to navigate the world, you know, it didn't really make its way into the final game. You know, like, that things like that were kind of disappointing. But, like, as a whole, like, the game was pretty solid. Like, the idea that people had that it was, like, this really, like, abominably bad platformer doesn't really make any sense. It's not even really a rehash of Woolly World, because it has, like, all these things, like, it has redesigned enemies, mechanics, like, it's, you know, the games are not that similar at all, truth be told. So, like, Crafted World, I feel like it was the last first-party Nintendo game to come out on the Switch, like, before you were allowed to like the Switch. Because I feel like, you know, throughout all of 2017 and all throughout 2018, there was this big push to try and, like, undermine, like, every single game that came out. So you saw a lot of people seething about Octopath Traveler, about ARMS, about Xenoblade Chronicles 2. Like, those games went on to become beloved classics. But, like, unfortunately, Yoshi and the Crafted World it was just lost in the shuffle, and people just never really like grew to appreciate it as much, even though there was nothing really wrong with it. And I think that's kind of the thing with Mysterious Book, is that they're trying to repeat history and try to like create this narrative that this is some huge epic disaster, and that this is gonna like somehow like destroy Nintendo and the Switch 2 and the Yoshi brand, and like we don't want games made for kids. It's just it's gonna fall apart. Like, this is gonna do fairly well because of the movie. It's gonna do well because of like Yoshi's popular. It's gonna be like a very well made game in general. The problem with this, like, though, is that like we keep seeing this happen over and over again. Is that every time we see anything Yoshi related, we have to see like the community come out and like start crying about how it's like not hardcore enough, as if like Yoshi's Island wasn't reviled and hated when it was shown off in '95. Okay, like, again, like, people seem to forget this, because like Yoshi's Island was the original Wind Waker, in that regard, because it had a wildly different art style than DKC. People thought it didn't look as good. It wasn't until later that it started becoming like seen as like an all-time classic. That's just the reality of it. I feel that like Nintendo is dominating, they're succeeding, and like the community just has to cope and seethe about things that simply don't matter. Like, if you're sitting there and complaining about a game for being a 2D platformer, for a game that's like, has a certain focus and a design, if you're like trying to write it off for like petty reasons, like, you're just, I do think eventually people are going to start laughing at you. And it's very interesting to look back at Yoshi's history, because like, I do think at this point there are a lot of people who like grew up on Yoshi's Island DS, people who grew up on like, Woolly World, people who played Crafted World when it first came out. Like, Mysterious Book might be the most successful Yoshi game we've seen in a long time. Honestly, going by what I've seen, considering like the situation it's in and all that. So like, I'm really curious if like these people are going to acknowledge their epic L, because Mysterious Book, if it does better than Crafted World, it's going to be the first Switch 2 game that like objectively outperformed the original, like the game on Switch 1. So it's going to be very, very interesting to kind of see that happen, and to try to see like what the cope for it is going to be. Like, considering like, it's launching in a pretty empty release window, considering the movie, considering how hot Yoshi is right now. I just can't imagine this game isn't going to be a major success. So, but the community is very, very anxious to downplay this game and keep up the facade that like Yoshi and Nintendo at large is this like perpetually failing brand, and it really is not going to survive the release of this game.